Hey guys, it's Luke-Yan, and today I am going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the months of June and July. June and July were very, very hectic months for me. I had a lot of senior year activities in June and grad parties, and then in July we went on like a few smaller vacations and all of that, so I didn't read a ton in both months, but so that's why I decided to combine, sorry, I'm fixing my tripod. That's why I decided to combine the two months worth of books into one video. But yeah, I do have quite a few books to talk about, so let's just dive right in. The first book that I read in the month of June was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and it definitely did not disappoint, and that was Silver in the Bone by Alexandra Bracken. This is the first book in a new YA fantasy duology, and it follows a main character named Tamsin, who is a Hollower, which is a sort of league of fantastical treasure hunters who kind of go into these ancient crypts and deal with sorceresses and like the cunning folk in order to find different relics and artifacts from mythology. And she has for the longest time been trying to figure out a way to break the curse on her brother Cabell, and when rumors begin to spread that there is this powerful ring from Arthurian legend, she decides to go on a journey through Avalon in order to try and find it and hopefully break the curse that is on her brother. So the tagline for the book is "Break the curse before it breaks you," and then there is like this little line on the back that says, "There are three magics to be feared: curses born of the wrath of gods, poisons that turn soil to ash, and that which leaves one dark of heart and silver in the bone." So I loved this book. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. I have loved almost every single Alexandra Bracken book that I have read, and I knew I was going to like this one because it dealt with Arthurian legend, and I've always been really interested in the Isle of Avalon, and I haven't really read any books that are set there, and the majority of this book actually takes place there, and there's a lot of like artifacts and quests that the characters go on, and it was just really interesting to deal with all the mythology that Alexandra Bracken wove into the story. I think the characters were really interesting. They are always kind of shining like moments in Alexandra Bracken books, and this one was no different. I loved Tamsin as a main character. I loved Cabell. I loved Neve and Eris, and just all of the different characters that we meet in this novel, and I think it was a really interesting start to what I hope will be a fantastic duology, and I'm super excited to see what happens in the second book, because this definitely left off on a big cliffhanger, as is typical with Alexandra Bracken, so definitely interested to see how the story progresses. Then I ended up rereading A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. I read this book I think 2 years ago, and I decided to reread it so that I could continue on with the series, and I feel like the first time I read it I didn't pay like enough attention, and I just wanted to kind of immerse myself back into the story so that I could like feel comfortable reading the next couple of books in the series, and I also wanted to watch the TV show, and I enjoyed this book. I kept my rating of 4 out of 5 stars. I do think that it is very, very long and a little bit too like convoluted, but I understand that that's like the whole point of the story. It's very like, and this is definitely like a setup book, but I enjoyed the majority of the characters. I liked the world. The writing was really interesting. I just think that a lot of the times I felt very bored and I had to like force myself to continue reading, but overall I do think it was interesting, and I do plan on continuing with the rest of the books in the series. Then after that I read a very different book, and that was Otter by Catherine Applegate. This is a middle grade book that follows a otter named Otter, and I don't really want to get into the plot because it's a very short book. It's very easy to read. But the back says, her mother called her Otter from the moment she was born, something about the way the little pup never settled, something about the way her eyes were always full of questions, and it kind of just follows her on her journey in this like rehabilitation center for otters, and it was really cute. I ended up giving it like 3.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite Catherine Applegate book, but they're always like really cute and fun to read, and I liked Otter as a main character. I just think that the plot could have been a little bit stronger, and I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But again, it's a really easy read. If you want something to just like warm your heart for a little while, definitely pick this one up. Then, following suit, I read The One and Only Ruby by Catherine Applegate. This is the third book in the One and Only series. The first book was The One and Only Ivan, and the second book was The One and Only Bob, and I read both of those books and I really enjoyed them, and I also really enjoyed this as well. I give it 4 out of 5 stars, and it kind of just follows Ruby on her journey, and we kind of just got to see what the other characters are up to. This is easily the shortest book in the series, but I thought it was really interesting. It like talks a lot about elephants and her backstory, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was super cute and definitely a worthwhile addition to this series. Then the last book that I read in June was The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. This is a kind of a romance book that follows a main character named Fizzy. It is actually a companion book to The Soulmate Equation, which I read when it came out like 2 years ago, I believe, and it follows her. She is a romance author, and she is kind of going through a little bit of a writing slump. She doesn't know what she wants to write next, and she's kind of trying to find her footing once again, and she ends up being cast in this reality TV show by this man named Connor, and the TV show is kind of like The Bachelor, where she'll meet different like heroes. She's like the heroine, and she'll meet different heroes and go on dates with them, and it's like this whole sort of thing, and along the way she finds out who her actual true love is, and if she is even, if the show is even worth it. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain because it is a romance book, so you probably know where it's going, but I really enjoyed this book. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I read it in like one day. It was super addicting, and I think this is like my favorite Christina Lauren book that I've read in like a while. I did really enjoy Something Wilder, but I read that book during like a difficult period of like my life, so like my personal life, so that kind of hindered the book a little bit, and I definitely liked this more than The Soulmate Equation. I found the characters a lot more interesting. This is probably one of the strongest plots of any Christina Lauren book that I've read. It's just very like there was a lot to like keep me reading. The chapters were really short and quick, and I really loved the two main characters in this book. We get both of their perspectives, and I just really I loved this story a lot. So yeah, definitely like a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and a Christina Lauren book that I would absolutely revisit in the future. And then after that, the first book that I read in July was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I do not have a physical copy of this book, unfortunately, because I'm waiting for it to come out in paperback, so that it will match like my other Emily Henry books, but this is easily my new favorite Emily Henry book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. I'm finally an Emily Henry stan. I really loved Book Lovers as well, but this one solidified that she is an auto-read author for me, and I just really enjoyed this story. And it follows, it's kind of difficult to explain, but it follows Harriet, who has this group of friends from college, and they go to this summer house in Maine every year, and this is their last year doing it, and in order to kind of like preserve this last year, she and her now ex-husband Wynn pretend to be still together. So it's kind of this like fake dating trope almost, and it goes back and forth between the past and the present. So the present where they're at, their happy place, and then the past when Harriet and Wynn are kind of meeting each other and all that sort of stuff. And it was an amazing book. I read this super fast as well. I read it on vacation, and it was amazing. It was like very, like there were definitely some darker undertones, as is, normal with Emily Henry, but I feel like this book was like especially poignant, and I just really enjoyed the story a lot. I thought the plot was really interesting, and these are probably my favorite set of characters that I've ever read in an Emily Henry book, and I think it was like a larger cast, so that helped me be like more invested in the story, because usually like when it's just the two love interests, sometimes I can lose interest, ironically, but this book was like, that wasn't the case for this book. I really enjoyed all the characters and the story and the romance, and definitely like one of my favorite books of the year and a new favorite romance book for me. Following that, I decided to read Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and unfortunately I didn't love this book as much as I was hoping to. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I am just waiting for another Abby Jimenez book that will be like The Friend Zone, because I've read all of her books and I haven't really enjoyed many of them. Like, I loved The Friend Zone. I liked the Happy Ever After playlist. I didn't really like Life's Too Short. Part of Your World, which is the companion to this book, I did enjoy. But then this book, it was like okay. Like, very mediocre and definitely too long. But this book follows a doctor named Brianna whose brother is going into renal failure, and she meets this other doctor who comes to the hospital who's like, it's kind of like enemies to lovers, but then he decides he will donate like his kidney to her brother, but then he also needs her to like pretend to be his girlfriend for his family. And it's just, I feel like Abby Jimenez bit off a lot more than she could chew in this book. It felt like 3 different plots merged into one that didn't mesh well, in my opinion. Like, it was enemies to lovers, workplace sort of dynamic. It was, oh, I'm gonna donate my kidney to help you, and then it was also like fake dating. And it just, oh, and then there's also, they write letters back and forth to each other. And it just felt a little bit crowded, and I feel like it could have been easily 2 or 3 different books. So that was like my main issue with the story, and I don't know, it just felt like a little bit slow to me. I think this was definitely reminded me a lot more of Life's Too Short than any of her other books, and I would say if I were to rank her books, Friendzone's definitely on top, then Part of Your World, then Happy Ever After playlist, then probably this, and then Life's Too Short. But yeah, not my favorite, but I will try to continue reading her books and see if another one sticks, but I'm probably going to go into the next couple with lower expectations. Then I decided to reread The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a book that I've been meaning to reread for a really long time because I read it for the first time in 2019, the year it came out, and the prequel was just released, so I wanted to reread it in preparation for the prequel, and just to kind of reacquaint myself with the world, because I do remember really enjoying this book. And I actually gave it 4 out of 5 stars the first time I read it, but now this time I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars because I enjoyed it a lot more the second time around, and this is going to be difficult to describe, but it is an epic fantasy standalone that follows 4 main characters. We have Ede, who is the sort of like lady-in-waiting, I guess, to the queen of this country called Innis, and she is like a hidden mage sent from the Priory of the Orange Tree to protect the queen, and the queen is sort of like modeled off Queen Elizabeth I, she is being pressured by everyone around her basically to marry someone and have a child, because her line of her like lineage is what will protect the world from the Nameless One, who is this like ancient dragon who is said to be rising soon. Then another character we have is Tane, who is an aspiring dragon rider. We have Niklas, who is an elderly alchemist. And then we also have Loth, who is also from Innis, who's going on a journey to sort of figure some stuff out. And it's just an amazing story. If you can deal with the slower pace of the novel, I think you will really enjoy it. And there's actually 6 parts to the story, so I would recommend kind of reading them in bigger chunks. I would say you could probably split up the part 1 into 2, so that it's kind of like 7 bigger chunks, so that it's almost like 100 pages for every chunk, because I think the book divides really well into those sections. So definitely a one you have to like take a little bit of a longer time with and settle into, but one that I think is really, really worth it if you're a big fantasy fan. And this is what I wanted from Game of Thrones. It's a great epic story, but it's also contained, and I know a lot of people have taken umbrage with the fact that the ending of the book is very quick, and while I do agree that it is quite fast, it isn't something that bothered me too much, because I really liked the slower moments with the characters, and I think that it mimicked the way that the characters felt, because they were obviously like, this is going really fast, and getting like whiplash from everything that's happening, but I thought it was great, and I love this book, and definitely one that I would recommend to almost any fantasy lover. Then after that, I picked up another one of my most anticipated books of the year, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, and this is another epic fantasy standalone that follows four main characters yet again. We have Glorian, who is the Queen of Innis, who is again kind of being pressured to marry, and she has like her own secret. We have Wolf, who lives in the north, who is like part of this whole like knight in training sort of situation. We have Dumai, who is a mountain climber, and then we have Tenuva, who is the tomb keeper of the Priory of the Orange Tree. And again, we follow them. I also give this book 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely going to be on my favorite books of the year list, and I just loved it. I thought it was so amazing. I loved the fantasy aspects of the story. I thought it was, even though it was quite slow yet again, I really felt myself being immersed in the story every time that I picked it up, and it was never something that I had to force myself to pick up. It was something that I was reading like whenever I could, and again, just a really knockout novel from Samantha Shannon that I'm super happy that I finally got around to. Then I decided to do another reread. This time I decided to pick up Carrie, Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a book that follows a main character named Carrie Soto, who at the start of the story we see her at the US Open, and she ends up watching a newer tennis player, a younger tennis player named Nikki Chan beat her record. And Carrie Soto at one point in the 70s and 80s was the best tennis player in the world. She had the most Grand Slam titles of anyone in the history of tennis, and she ended up retiring because of an injury, and she's now 37 years old. But when she sees Nikki Chan take her title, she decides that she will come back and try to win at least one more Grand Slam. So we see we see her backstory in a section. It's like her the first time around, and then we see her going through each of the 4 major Grand Slams. So we have the Australian Open, the French Open, the Wimbledon, and the US Open, and she is kind of training for all of them. Along the way, she kind of rekindles a flame with another tennis player who is like kind of thinking about retiring. And I love this book so much. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars when I first read it, and somehow I enjoyed it even more the second time around. I like reading this book when like the Grand Slams are actually on TV. So I read it for the first time when the US Open was on last year, and I read it this time when Wimbledon was on. So it was really fun to kind of read this book and then watch some of the matches on TV. And I play tennis myself, so it was really interesting to kind of get into the mind of someone who loves the sport so much. And I just thought this was a really interesting story. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing, the plot, like even the second time around, like kept me on the edge of my seat. Like my heart was pounding when I was reading some sections, and it's just amazing, and I would definitely recommend it whether you like tennis or not. It's just a great story all around. After that, I decided to pick up Willowdeen by Katherine Applegate, which is another middle grade story that follows a main character named Willowdeen who lives in this town where there are these creatures called hummingbears and these creatures called screechers. And again, I don't love explaining Katherine Applegate books because they are short and I don't want to give anything away, but I'm giving this book 4 out of 5 stars as well, I believe. I thought it was really heartwarming and really cute. I loved the creatures. I want a hummingbear for myself. I want a screecher for myself as a pet. All that stuff. Just a really great middle grade novel that I would definitely recommend to people who've read Katherine Applegate before, or people who maybe want to jump into her books for the first time. And then the final book that I read in July was Arch-Conspirator by Veronica Roth. This is a novella that is a kind of sci-fi retelling of Antigone, and I don't really know how to explain it, but if you know the tale of Antigone, this one is like retelling. And I don't know, I feel like I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I've read a few Veronica Roth books in the past, and I have enjoyed most of them. But this book was like okay to me. I just feel like novellas are never really my thing because I always want like a larger story, especially with a book like this where there's so much story to tell. I feel like Veronica Roth bit off a little bit more than she could chew because there are a lot of perspectives in this book and a big story, and it kind of just goes up pretty fast, and at the end of the book it just feels like we stopped in the middle of the story. So I feel like, also, this book definitely feels like it was written for people who like have read and loved Antigone, and it seems like if you don't love Antigone or you've never read it like me, you can't enjoy the story, which is never something that I love in a retelling, but It was okay. I enjoyed it. I liked the writing, and I thought that the plot was interesting. I just wanted a lot more from the story as a whole. But that is it for the list of books that I read in June and July. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you've read any of the books that I read in these past 2 months, I would love to know your thoughts on them. I would also love to know what books you read in June and July, but yeah, that is it. I really hope you guys liked this video. All my social media links are in the description box below, and I will see you soon for a new video. Bye!